The air was soft with the scent of lavender hanging in the stillness like a whispered promise. Somewhere in the distance, a creek murmured beneath the weight of moonlight, and the fields stretched on forever, rolling waves of purple that shimmered in the gentle night breeze. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time, cradled between memory and dream, where even the stars seemed to exhale slowly. Isla arrived just before dusk, her suitcase kicking up a puff of dust as it bumped along the cobbled path. The old cottage stood nestled among the fields, ivy curling over its stone walls, the windows glowing dimly as though they'd been expecting her. She hesitated before the door, fingers grazing the worn brass handle, the key still tucked in her pocket with the letter creased, yellowed, and signed in the familiar hand she hadn't seen in years. Her aunt had always called this place the sanctuary. Isla hadn't been back since childhood, since the summers filled with jam-stained fingers and chasing dragonflies through lavender rows. She didn't even know why she'd come back now. Maybe it was the weight of the city pressing too hard, or maybe it was what the letter said, "Come find the peace you forgot you needed." Inside, the cottage smelled of dried herbs and honeyed wood. Dust clung to the corners, but the space felt warm, like it had been holding its breath just for her. On the kitchen table sat a small journal bound in faded leather, a lavender sprig pressed between its pages. Isla ran her hand over it and opened to the first page. There was no title, just a date and her name. July 14th. Isla returned today. She doesn't remember the truth yet, but she will. She blinked, her fingers paused, a tremor of something, confusion maybe, or a memory surfacing too quickly rippled beneath her skin. The journal was in her aunt's handwriting, but the dates were recent, too recent. That night, Isla couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but a restlessness that pulsed just beneath the surface of her thoughts. She stepped outside, drawn by the cool hush of the lavender fields. Crickets sang low lullabies as she wandered, barefoot, the earth cool and damp beneath her toes. The wind carried something else now, not just the lavender, but a whisper of music, faint, elusive. She followed it, past the old well, beyond the oak tree that marked the end of the visible fields. She came to a clearing. She didn't remember being there. In the center, a man sat on a wooden bench playing a violin. The melody was haunting, yet comforting, notes that curled around her like a story half told. He looked up, eyes a stormy gray that seemed oddly familiar. "You've grown," he said, his voice low and even. Isla stepped back instinctively, unsure why her heart stuttered at the sound. "Do I know you?" she asked. He smiled, bittersweet. "Not yet, but you did, once." The wind picked up then, rustling the lavender in soft applause. He set the violin down beside him and gestured for her to sit. Against every logical thought, she did. He didn't explain everything at once, just fragments like petals drifting in a breeze. His name was Elias. He had known her when they were children, when she used to visit every summer. They'd once made a pact beneath the stars to always find each other again. "But I never came back," she murmured, piecing together the fragments. "You did," he said gently, "but not the way you remember. There was an accident, Isla. The summer you turned 12, you fell near the cliffs. You were never the same after." Her breath caught. "I don't," but then she did. Flashes, the wind, the dizzying fall, the sound of someone calling her name, and then nothing. Elias looked at her with a sadness carved from years. "Your aunt brought you here every summer afterward, hoping the place would heal you. and it did in pieces. You forgot me to survive, but part of you always remembered. In dreams, in music, in lavender. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden. "Why are you still here?" she whispered. His gaze drifted skyward. "Because this is where I lost you, and where I promised I'd wait." The next morning, Isla woke in her bed. The journal was open on her chest, but there were new words now in her own handwriting. "I remember the boy in the lavender fields. I remember the music, and I remember the promise." In the days that followed, the cottage became a home again. She cleaned, she cooked, she let the stillness wrap around her. Each night she wandered to the clearing, and Elias was always there, sometimes playing, sometimes just waiting. And slowly, piece by piece, she remembered the language they used to share, the way he'd braid flowers into her hair, the way they'd map the stars with fingers and belief. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and turned the fields to liquid gold, she turned to him and said, "You waited so long." His fingers brushed hers, tentative. "You were always worth the wait." There was no need to say more. That night, the air was cool and scented, and Isla slept deeply for the first time in years. Her dreams were filled with lavender and laughter, with a boy who had waited and a promise that had endured. And far beyond the fields, the stars twinkled like guardians, watching two souls rediscover the quiet magic of remembering. The lavender, after all, always blooms again. The days began to melt into one another, and Isla found herself waking earlier each morning, drawn to the lavender fields before the sun had fully risen. She would sit on the stone bench beneath the oak tree, where the dew clung to the petals and the air was still, as if holding its breath. Elias would always find her there, walking slowly across the fields, his presence an echo of something long silenced in her heart. There was something peaceful about the mornings, now something tender and full of quiet longing. The sun spread its golden light over the land. The lavender seemed to respond, the purple flowers glowing as though they held within them secrets only the dawn could reveal. It was during one of these early mornings, as the light began to break through the shadows, that Elias told her about the music. The violin, the melodies they used to play as children, the songs that seemed to carry more than just sound, they carried memory. "It's not just for you," Elias said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, as if speaking too loudly would shatter something fragile. "The music is what anchors us here. Without it, the fields, this place, would lose its magic." Isla furrowed her brow, confused. "What do you mean? How can music keep a place alive?" He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening, as if a part of him had been waiting for this question. "The lavender fields have their own life, Isla, and so does this cottage, and so do you. Everything in this place is woven together like threads in a tapestry. The music, the sound of our memories, is what keeps it from fading, from dissolving into the past. Without it, everything would vanish, even me." Her heart stilled. "You?" Elias nodded, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, where the early morning mist curled like smoke. "I was always meant to be a part of this place, but I'm not of it. You're the one who belongs here, Isla. I'm just a keeper of memories, a shadow of what once was." The words settled around her like a thick fog, wrapping her in the weight of them. She didn't understand, not completely, but she could feel the truth in them, a kind of quiet certainty that echoed in the depths of her soul. There were moments when she thought she saw him fading just for a second, his figure becoming less defined, like a ghost caught in the evening mist, and it scared her more than she was willing to admit. "Is it happening now?" she asked one morning, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. Elias met her gaze, his expression soft but filled with something she couldn't quite name. "I've always known that one day you would have to leave, Isla. This place, it needs you. But me, I'm a memory just like everything else here. You're the one who brings it all to life. And when you're ready, you'll take that life with you wherever you go." A weight pressed down on her chest, but she didn't know if it was the weight of loss or the weight of something far more beautiful and fleeting. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Elias reached out, brushing it away with the gentleness of a summer breeze. "I can't stay here forever," she whispered, a truth she hadn't yet spoken aloud. "No," he said, his voice steady, though there was a trace of sadness in it. "You're meant for the world beyond these fields. But I'll always be here in the music, in the lavender, in the soft glow of the moon. When you remember me, I'll remember you." The days began to feel like a countdown, though Isla didn't know what the final moment would be. Each evening she sat with Elias as he played the violin, and the melodies wove through her like a lullaby. Every note seemed to tell a story she had forgotten, a story that felt more real than anything she had ever known. The music began to take on a life of its own, and Isla found herself humming the songs in the quiet hours of the night. She felt connected to the land in a way she hadn't realized was possible. The lavender seemed to breathe with her, the wind whispered through the fields like a secret, and the night sky stretched wide, holding its breath. But as much as she tried to ignore the sinking feeling, the truth became clearer with every passing day. The more she remembered, the more Elias seemed to fade. His presence, once so solid, so real, was slipping through her fingers like sand. One evening, as the sun sank low, casting long shadows across the fields, Elias didn't come to her. She waited, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and fear. When the night grew heavy and still, she ventured into the lavender fields, following the path they had walked together so many times. The clearing was empty. Panic rose in her chest as she ran through the rows of lavender, calling his name, but the wind carried only silence in return. Finally, she reached the bench where he had always played, and there, lying in the grass, was the violin, silent, still, untouched by the hands that once made it sing. Isla's breath caught in her throat. She sank to her knees beside it, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold wood. The air was thick with lavender, but it felt different now, heavier, as if the scent itself had begun to mourn. And then, in the distance, she heard it, the faintest whisper of music, a soft, lingering melody. Her heart soared with hope as she followed the sound, her feet moving on their own, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. The clearing was still empty when she reached it, but there underneath the oak tree was a single sprig of lavender. Its deep purple color seemed to glow in the dim light. Isla reached down and picked it up, a sudden realization sweeping over her. The music was no longer coming from Elias. It was coming from her. The lavender, the fields, the memories, they had all been waiting for her to remember who she was. And in that moment she understood. Elias had never truly left. He was always a part of her, a part of the land, a part of the music. The magic was never in his presence alone, but in the way he had always taught her to listen to the land, to the wind, to the silence between the notes. As the music swelled in her chest, Isla knew that she would carry this place with her always. The lavender fields would never fade from her memory. They would always be there, woven into the threads of her soul, waiting for her to return. And she would, not in the way she once thought, but in a way that felt just as real, just as enduring. For the lavender fields and everything they held were a part of her now forever. The next few days passed in a strange blend of peace and quiet anticipation. Isla moved through the cottage with a sense of serenity she hadn't felt in years. The weight of the music now permanently settled in her chest, a soft hum that thrummed beneath everything she did. Every touch, every step felt connected to the land around her, as if the earth itself was cradling her in its embrace. Each evening, as the sun dipped low and the lavender fields were bathed in the golden warmth of twilight, Isla would sit beneath the oak tree, the violin resting in her lap. At first, she simply held it, her fingers tracing the strings lightly, unsure if she was truly ready to play again. But each time the urge grew stronger, as though the music itself was calling to her, urging her to return to what she had forgotten. On the fourth night, she did. The bow slid across the strings, tentative at first, but then with more confidence as the sound began to flow. It wasn't the same as before. There was something deeper now, more soulful. Each note felt like it carried a story, a memory, a piece of herself that she hadn't known was missing. The song was soft, delicate, as if it was being whispered between worlds. But as she played, something unexpected happened. The lavender, which had always been still and quiet beneath the stars, began to sway in time with the music. The wind, once a gentle presence, stirred around her, swirling the fields like a dance. The stars overhead flickered, and for a moment the sky felt closer, like a dome made just for this moment. And then, as if responding to the music, the air around her thickened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him, Elias, standing at the edge of the field, his figure bathed in silver light. His presence was not like before, not a shadow or a memory, but real, tangible, his features clear and sharp in the moonlight. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that left her breathless. "You found it," he said, his voice as soft as the evening breeze. Isla's heart pounded in her chest. She stopped playing, but the music still lingered in the air, the notes drifting like fragile butterflies. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. How are you here?" Elias stepped closer, his movements fluid, almost dreamlike. "You remembered," he replied. "The music was always yours to find. The violin, the fields, the memories, all of it was waiting for you to rediscover what you had forgotten." Isla swallowed, struggling to make sense of it all. "But I thought you were just a memory, a part of this place." "I was," he said, his gaze softening, "and I still am. But now I'm a part of you, Isla. You've carried me with you all this time, even when you didn't know it. Every note, every melody, it was all a bridge connecting us."